Hey everyone, it's Austin Solomon, the Solomon Group at Coldwell Banker. Welcome to this week's episode of the Real Wausau Real Estate Show. Today I'm joined by Jeff Newman from Newman Home Inspections. Jeff, how are you?
I'm outstanding, Austin. Thanks for having me on the show.
Hey, absolutely. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about pre-inspections. What are they? As a seller, if you're selling your home, should you get your home pre-inspected? Is it the right thing for you? So I'll start it off. So a pre-inspection, this is where, as a seller of the home, as a homeowner, you would have an inspector come in and do an inspection before you put your home on the market or before a buyer purchases your home. Sometimes a lot of sellers, I would say 98% of sellers don't do a pre-inspection. It's kind of more of a rare thing. But today we're talking about, should you do one? Would it make sense to do one as a seller? So, Jeff, tell me a little bit about your experience doing pre-inspections. Do you like doing them? What are your thoughts about them?
I like doing pre-inspections for a couple of reasons. Number one, it helps the seller in the whole process. You can identify what you need to do to get your house ready for an inspection.
Yep.
The inspector has an opportunity to go through the house and then identify small problems or even large problems that will come up on the inspection report.
Right.
And then the seller has an opportunity to fix these items or, at least be aware of these items before they get to the negotiating table.
Yep.
As far as the experience, the buyer is paying for an inspection report, and you want to make sure that the buyer gets his money's worth. So what I like to do is identify things to the seller that makes them aware of what has to be accessible and inspectable for an inspection.
Right. Yeah, that's something. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So I know as an agent, I've gotten those phone calls for inspectors. Hey, I can't access the attic because we got a master closet full of shoes and boxes and stuff, and I just can't, I'd have to move all this stuff out. And obviously as an inspector, like, you guys can't really do that. Well, you could, but there's a little bit of liability if you have to move like a whole closet worth of stuff just to access an attic. So those are some of the things, like, hey, being able to access the attic, the water meter, those types of things.
Yeah, and I think one of the most common things that is what you already mentioned is the attic access.
Yep.
I was in a house yesterday where they had two different accesses for the attic. One was in the garage. The attic access was blocked by a car that was parked in the garage.
Yep.
The other one was a closet that had some really nice dresses and clothes and items on the shelves. And, as a home inspector, we're not supposed to touch or move personal items.
Yeah, right.
The other thing you have to always be aware of is the inspector has to be able to get at the electrical panel, the furnace, the water heater, the water meter.
Yep.
A lot of times water meters are concealed in the walls. And the inspector really needs to be aware of where those things are because it's sometimes hard to find those things.
Yep. Especially if basements have been finished off in older homes. I've noticed that too, where all of a sudden you'll see this little box that's, something's boxed in, and it's not, maybe it's, you have to unscrew like 8 screws in order to get to it. But like you say, you can't, as an inspector, you're not supposed to do that. So that would be great for the seller to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to unscrew this, have this accessible, cover open for the inspector.
Yeah, exactly. The inspector is, according to the state of Wisconsin standards of practice, we are not required to remove any panel that isn't designed to be removed.
Makes sense. Yep. So. Good. Okay, so back to the seller pre-inspection. So as an agent, well, a couple of things. So on the buyer side and on the agent side, right, one of the pros of doing a pre-inspection is that the buyer, if they see a copy of a pre-inspection and they say, hey, this is the condition of the house, I'm comfortable with it, right? It kind of eliminates a big what if, right? So a buyer, if they have that inspection and it comes back clean, or if they have the inspection and the seller has time to remedy some of the issues that came back and the buyer can see that, then the buyers might say, hey, I'm comfortable with this. I'm going to buy a home without an inspection, right? Now, what are some of the caveats, or, we were talking before we recorded this, the buyer, the only risk on that side is that, because that report wasn't prepared for that buyer, there's not a whole lot of recourse if there was something that, was missed by that inspector that did the pre-inspection. The buyer may not have much recourse, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Really, the name on the report represents ownership, and if you don't have ownership of the report itself,
Yep.
Then you really have no recourse to go back after, whatever.
Yeah, right. Yep.
So-
No, that makes sense. Yep. So to recap, if you're doing a home inspection as a buyer, you you have to understand that when you hire a home inspector, that inspector is working for you. But if it's a pre-inspection, right, the seller's the one that hired that inspector. So, again, you get to see the report, but it's not the exact same. Like, it's not like you didn't hire the inspector, therefore, like, the inspector's not necessarily working for you.
Yeah, and the scope of the report really doesn't change. However, the emphasis does. With an inspection for pre-sale inspection, what we're looking for mainly is what's going to affect the sale of the house.
Right.
With a home inspection for a buyer, we're more concerned with what that buyer is going to be responsible for once he does buy the house.
Correct. Yep. Great point. On our end, I would say some of the pros and cons of doing a pre-inspection as a seller, right? So obviously you have to pay for it as a seller. So it's typically ranges between, it can be anywhere from, $400 to $500, sometimes more if it's depending on the size of the house, what's all being expected, etc. So as a seller, if you do a pre-inspection, obviously you have to pay for that, right? The pro is that you get you get an opportunity to, if there are issues, you can remediate those, and you have a lot of time to do so. Typically, right? If you have a pre-inspection done right away, you may have a little bit more time as you're prepping the home for sale to make some of those modifications or plan some of those things. Versus if you put your home up for sale, you get an accepted offer on it. A lot of times closings are 30 to 60 days. The inspection happens 15 to 20 days in the process, right? That adds a little extra stress because now you only have 30 days to figure that stuff out versus if you do it up front, you have more time to plan. So that's a big pro. The other pro as a seller is that, the whole process of buying a house is, as a buyer, right, or as a seller, if you can eliminate the what ifs, right? What if this happens? What if that happens? Buyers, that's what they think. Like, what if this? What if that? If you can eliminate the what ifs as a seller, the buyer is going to be much more comfortable in the process, right?
Well, I agree 100%. Knowledge is power.
Yep.
Okay, so the more you know about a house, obviously, the easier it's going to be to make a decision.
Yep.
And as a seller, a lot of the things that are identified in an inspection are very easily fixed. One of the things we key in on is going to be drainage for the property. And if it's a matter of buying some black dirt or some clay to improve a drainage situation,
Yep.
or repairing gutters or putting gutter extensions on, these are all very, very easy fixes.
Yep.
And you can take care of that because the more findings that you'll have on a report when you do a walkthrough with a buyer, the buyer can get overwhelmed.
Yes. Yep.
Even though it's, just a many, many little things, it all accumulates and it gives buyers a real, the hair on the back of their neck stands up and they just say, wow, do I really want to buy this house? When really it's small items.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So sellers that are listening, when you have, us, right? Now, I've probably looked at 750, 800 home inspections. I mean, obviously you've, looked at way more, or inspected way more. So now us, right? We see these reports all the time. We're looking for things. We're looking for the magnitude of issues, right? What things? What's the magnitude? Like there could be 40 items, but is there any few items that have a big dollar amount to them? That's kind of what us professionals or the seasoned people look at. But you got to understand, a buyer that's buying their first home, or even a buyer that's buying a house, right? They've maybe only gone through the process once before. If there's 40 items, they might be overwhelmed by that, even though, a lot of those things are minor. It might be like, hey, missing a smoke detector or missing a CO detector or changing out an outlet. But the amount of items can be overwhelming to a buyer, and that can cause a little extra stress. So as a seller, if you're doing a pre-inspection, if you can eliminate a lot of those small things, again, that can just help the process and have a better, impression of the home for the buyer.
Yeah, and even if you do have some electrical issues, that can be a higher ticket item.
Yep.
If you were to eliminate all of the, the smaller items, now you've got one or two items that are of concern.
Yep.
It's a lot easier for people to deal with one or two items,
Yep.
even though they may be more expensive.
Correct.
So
I agree. Good. All right, well, that wraps up this week's episode of The Real, talking about pre-inspections and some of the things to consider. Jeff, thanks for joining me on the show.
thanks, Austin.